Hello, everybody on Facebook. We are day 2, back to basics training. I hope you enjoyed day 1, where we identified a bunch of stuff. I know we kind of went through like a bunch of things. So we're going to recap kind of what we went over and what we're going to be doing for day 2. And then day 3 is coming up. That is the end day to our training. And again, I'm not selling anything to you. This is free to you. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And this will be in the Facebook group as well, recording for you to be a better human. So let's get into it today. Happy Tuesday, by the way. It is a beautiful, beautiful day. So we have day 2 training. So now you have the narrative. Remember yesterday we went over the narrative and we went over the 7 rules, kind of how to explore the narrative and to set up the narrative, to find the narrative, so that way we can find the issue, find the problem. Because if you know how to find problems, then you know how to figure out a solution for the problems. Now, the solution for the problems may always, just be there could be like 50 million different ways to do certain things. But again, that 80-20 rule of effectiveness over ineffectiveness, that is our goal. And so we're going to go into applying the rules that we have learned yesterday into today. So remember the 7 rules. So recap of day 1, you have the golden rule. That is rule number 1. And that is be kind to yourself always, because you can't be your own abuser. You always, always, always have to watch your words. That's number 2, to yourself and to others, because how you talk to yourself is a direct reflection of how you treat and talk to others, which impacts the environment. It does. You have so much influence, and we'll talk about that today. So number 3 is time and grace for yourself is needed first, and then others, because otherwise we go into this people-pleasing, others-focused solution, and we don't actually find the solutions to our own problems. We try and solve everybody else's. And, I can speak from a, experience of being a therapist. Of when I was a young therapist, it was like, I have to solve everybody's problems, but it's not that way. You just lead people to the tools. They solve problems for themselves. So put your own mask on first. Then you need to respond instead of react. So rule number 4 is taking the time to formulate a response instead of just a reaction over emotions, is what we typically do. And that's why you find yourself impulse buying and all that thing is just a reaction based off of how you feel, because we want to feel good. We want to feel safe, and we want to feel connected. So we want to make sure that we are responsive to our environment instead of reactive. Rule number 5 is the healthy celebration of achievement. And this is rewards and delayed gratification. Make sure that you reward yourself for the things that you do that are beneficial, that work, that are effective, that move you forward. And that therefore you do it over and over and over again, because if you don't reinforce it, then why do it and why continue? You would just give up, because it's like there's nothing to strive for. There's no carrot at the end of this stick, or in my case, Andy's candies after this. Rule number 6 is wants versus needs. You want to make sure that you understand the difference between a want versus an actual need. And sometimes we'll say, well, a need is a home, like I have to own my home. That's kind of like a want, because you need a roof over your head. How you get that roof over your head, that's completely, back to the subjectiveness. There's 50 million ways to do that. But what you have to understand is that what you need is totally different from what you want. And if you understand what you need, you're always going to find joy through the pain, because you're realizing that I'm actually not in this craziness that I actually believe or I perceive that I am in. I'm just in this. This is my reality, and I actually have my basic needs met. Now, where do I want to go? Like, where do I want to get to in my life to make it even more of a beneficial, positive experience for me and my quality of life? So that's what you have to ask yourself. And then rule number 7 is the 80-20 rule. 80% effectiveness. We strive for that goal. It is not a set in stone. It's just something to strive for. And then 20% ineffective behavior. and leave yourself room for error. So this squashes the perfectionism. This squashes the imposter syndrome. This squashes a lot of that because you're giving yourself a margin for error. So also, when you're looking into a problem, to find the narrative, you find it in 7 seconds or less. And we talked about that yesterday. And then you'll also incorporate things to understand where this narrative is coming from. And that is your mind, your body, and your heart, your voice. So when we talk about the body, we talk about the gut and how the gut is our first brain. We want to gut check ourselves. That is the truth of the reality, because your gut will tell you if you're in danger or not. And then you have your heart, which is your voice, your soul. That is what you believe. And we're going to talk about that today on how to identify that. And your mind is your fact checker. It's your Google fact checker. Like, it is not your friend, but it is there to verify certain information. So that was day 1 training. So day two is awesome. Day 2 is awesome because now we just figure out how to apply it. So we have the problem, and everybody asks, like, what's the solution? So I have a problem. What do I do about it? And this is where we have to go through a couple different steps, and I'll teach you those different steps. But the simple answer is find what works. We're going to find what works for you because you are an individual. You are very different in your likes, dislikes, what motivates you, what drives you. Even though you are a basic human with basic human functions and basic human emotions, and we can predict a lot of the things that you do, you are also individual in that you like variances. And so we're going to talk about those today. So tools to make a decision. Your what ifs. Your what ifs are fear-based. Your what ifs are, what if this happens, or what if they think about this, or what if I fail, or what if. So if you've noticed this graphic over on the right-hand side, that is Alice in Wonderland. I hope I'm not dating myself. This is kind of like, everybody knows this movie, but I swear I'm like getting to the age where it's like you have to verify, like, hey, do you know what this reference is? So this is Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know. And she goes down a rabbit hole. So this is how we're going to go down this rabbit hole, this with the if and then statement. So if there's a what if, it's based in fear, and you take yourself on a mental journey through this process. And what this looks like is it goes from, if this happens, then this will happen. And if this happens, then this happens. And if this happens, then this happens. But this could also happen. And if this happens, then so you're building out a tree. You're building out a tree in your mind of all the different possibilities of what could. Now, this takes time and effort and energy. And when you're going into fear, you can combat it by simple steps and say, I'm not going to allow the fear to control me. I'm going to control my outcome by understanding the values and the principles that I believe in. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But when you're dealing with fear, sometimes you want to play the tape forward just to see what that looks like. What's the worst case scenario? What's the least case scenario? Or what's the best case scenario? What's the least amount of pain? And orienting yourself into what can happen. But typically it never turns out the way that we think it's going to turn out. Like, even if we go down all these rabbit holes, we can waste time here and say, like, hey, like, these are all the possibilities, but understand that it's like a job interview. When you go into a job interview and you go into it prepared with a list of questions that you think that they're going to ask, and they like throw some random question at you of like, hey, what's your grandma's favorite color? Just to throw you off, to see what kind of personality that you have and that you're not just some robot. Every experience that you go through, it's never going to be 100% of how you anticipate it. So if you understand this concept, things are not going to seem so big, and it's not going to seem like a mountain of things when it's really just a molehill that you have to move through into your challenge. So then you ask yourself, worst case scenario, what's the probability versus the possibility? Now, is it possible that it can happen? Absolutely. Everything can happen. So if you come up with a what if statement of, if I start my business and I fail, is it possible that you can fail at a business? And this is kind of a trick question because now we're going back to wording. Now, define failure. What is a failure? Failure, really, for purposes of the definitions of how I do things, failure really only resorts to one thing, and that's suicide. Failure is quitting and it completely ending. And I know that a lot of people have different beliefs on that, but honestly, that's what I stand by, because it's not necessarily a failure in your life of these other situations other than suicide, because it's a life lesson. Brene Brown talks about this a lot. It's a life lesson. It's a stepping stone. It's a next step to where you're going to go. It's a lesson that you learn. And if it doesn't work, if it's ineffective, well, then great. You found out what doesn't work. So now we can find out what does work. So possibility, is it possibility that your business can fail? Let's reword that. Well, is it a possibility that I can start this business and it not be profitable? There you go. That's the actual, question that you have to ask yourself. Absolutely, it's possible. Now, is it probable? Is it going to happen? Are the stakes or the odds or the statistics? Like, what does that say? Is it probable that it's going to happen? And if it's probable that it's going to happen, then obviously we need to make sure that we take some necessary steps in place in order to combat that, in order to figure that and navigate through that challenge as well. But typically things are possible to happen, but typically they are not probable. So really look at the language that you're using to describe the problem, because we want to make sure that we come up with a solution to describe this problem. Let's say that it is probable, and let's say that it's possible and there's a high risk. Then it becomes a threat, and now we resort to the 4Fs. The 4Fs is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I know that I put dodge, duck, dip, dive, dodge, because I really feel like that is kind of like a reference to how we really have to think about this. It's dodge, duck, dip, dive, dodge. It's funny, but it's also a really good way to explain, just kind of the processes in that movie. And I love that reference. But in your life, you have the 4Fs, which explain what you do and why you do it. So when you are in survival response, there's the 4Fs. You have fight, which is your aggressive stance. You square up your shoulders. You become more confrontational. You ask questions. Your pupils dilate. You're dialed into the situation, and your body is going haywire in just receiving a bunch of information. And it's getting your body ready to withstand and stand up against the problem, whatever the problem is. Now, our bodies were designed to run from bears and dinosaurs. They're not designed to watch our iPhone batteries die, and think that that's death and a threat. But we respond just in the same manner, because our bodies have not had time to evolve, and basic functions are pretty much still the same in that. So you want to make sure that you understand, like, when you are in a survival response, like, what is your go-to reaction? And you can use a combination of all 4 of these, but really it's what is dependent upon your previous responses to certain things in your life. But it's also based off of like the situation itself. So if your body, and it does all this for you within a nanosecond, your body will determine, can I take this person? Can I become aggressive to this person? And do I have a chance to fight? And if you do, that's the one that you typically go with. Flight is when you run. You want to flee from the situation. You want to remove yourself from the situation in order to survive and stay safe. And oftentimes what that looks like is we withdraw. We go to our rooms. Depression is a type of flight. Avoidance is a type of flight. And so we find ourselves kind of like moving from situation to situation or relationship to relationship. And this is why people jump in and out of relationships just to survive, because they feel like there is an actual threat on their life, even though that threat to the life is typically perceived. And then you have your freeze response, which is your third response. You do nothing. You play dead. You freeze. You are like a tree. You're just in the background and you do nothing, because if you play dead, then they might go for something else. If you do this, if they're very aggressive, and you can't run and you can't fight them off and you can't try and manipulate them, so you'll do nothing and just stay still. And this is where silence comes in. And if you have your throat feels like constricted, that means you feel unheard. And if you feel unheard, then that is a freeze response. That is I have to stay silent in order to survive this situation. And then you fawn, which is your manipulation. That's your people pleaser. That's your, here, I'm going to give you whatever you want, so you can just stop hurting me, or the threat will leave. And when you understand the 4 F's and what you're doing and how you're doing it, you understand where that comes from, and you'll understand what type of or part of the brain that you're in. Because the way that it works is that if you are in a survival response, your something called a prefrontal cortex, which is right behind your forehead, that is responsible for logic and memory and functioning and regulating emotions. That actually shuts off. It's almost like a light switch. It comes down and it just shuts off functioning. And your midbrain, or your reptilian brain, will come online, and that's what controls the 4 F's. And this is so you survive. And put it this way: if I were to put a pillow over your face, you wouldn't be thinking, oh my gosh, this woman is so nice and she's helped me through so much, and oh my gosh, she's the greatest coach ever, and blah, 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 blah. You're going to be thinking about, how do I get this pillow off of my face as fast as possible so I can breathe? And your brain does that automatically, and it's a default. So the guilt and the shame of, oh gosh, like, why did I react that way? And why, blah, 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 that's unnecessary right here. Because you're going to have an initial reaction. And the initial reaction is going to not be a moral decision. It's going to be whatever is going to keep you safe, depending on the perceived threat of what that is. So know what you do and why you do it. Now, let's say that you have the problem, but let's say that you really don't know where you fit in. So this is where we use the OODA loop. And prior Air Force veteran, I'm going to rep this forever, because this is from an Air Force colonel, John Boyd. He came up with this OODA loop concept based off of how pilots train in the military. And it's really cool in that the way pilots train, and if you think about it, you're flying a $22 million plane up in the air. And other than mechanical failures, you're the thing, you're the person, you're the entity in that jet that's keeping it up in the air, that's keeping it flying, and you're moving it, you're maneuvering it, and you are directly responsible for that piece of equipment that's $22 million. And so when you're in that capacity, in the mental space that they need to be in, this is how they get into it, because you're going to have different wingmen up with you up in the sky. There's never a plane that goes up by itself when you're talking about fighter jets. And so they call them sorties. And if you see the picture, they're kind of, some of the times they fly in formation. And this is really important to understand, because as you're moving through life, you are in the cockpit of your body. Your body is a conduit. Your soul, you manipulate it, you drive it, you motivate it, you drive it to change, you make a decision. But you have a conduit, that's your body, that is kind of like your plane. And then you have other people around here. These are your wingmen. Who's in your community? Who's closest to you? And whoever is closest to you, do they help you? Are they toxic? Do they need to push back a little bit more? And when you orient yourself into space and time of where you fall into your life, it removes a bunch of confusion and the brain fog that you might have, because now your brain is no longer confused on its role, and you can start to make decisions based off of confirmation bias of, okay, this is good for me, and I'm going to think about all the other good things. So the way that pilots train, because if you go left, if you in that formation, in that picture, if you go left and everybody else goes right, what's going to happen? And let's say that you're in the middle of the formation, what's going to happen? Yeah, what's the probability? What's the possibility? Look at the narrative, right? So you want to orient yourself in space and time, meaning, where am I in this world? What are my roles? So for me, I'm a coach, I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. You know, there's a lot of things that you are, and roles that you play. Now, I am also caring on the internal side. I am loving, I am generous, I'm kind. You know, some quirky things about me is I love liver and onions. That's like my favorite. That's my favorite dish that I can eat like all day, every day. I know some people may not, identify with that, but hey, like that's just true to who I am. And so I'm going to be looking for things that push me forward in the goals that I like. So if I like liver and onions, like I'm going to look for liver and onions as a reward. That's just how it is. That's who I am. So I'm orienting myself to space and time, and where I am in this world and my roles. And then what I like, because that is going to influence my environment. Then you're going to observe. You're going to observe for patterns of behavior. Patterns are the quickest way to understand the scenario and how you respond to certain things. So if you find yourself responding to the same scenario, even though it's different places, different faces, but it's pretty much the same lesson, and you're responding to it in the same way, and you're finding it ineffective, then it's time to change. So always look and observe for patterns, look for where you want to go, look for your goals, have it in mind. But if you focus on the smaller details of the goals, sometimes you get lost. So you want to have a bird's eye view of kind of what you want, but don't bank on that. That's what I'm saying. So put it's like a GPS. You put your address into the GPS. There's 50 million ways to get there, but you have an idea of where you're going. So observe, and then you're going to decide. You're going to decide what you're going to do with the information that you have. And once you decide on what to do, you're going to look at all the options and respond instead of react. Then you're going to act on your decision. Once you make your decision, stick with that decision. There's a lot of things that we find ourselves in, and we're just like, oh, did I make the right decision? I get really confused. But unless there is like 100% evidence that this is going to end badly, stick with your decision. You can always pivot later, but in the initial stages, once you make a choice, you stick with that choice until it proves that it's going to be harmful, or if there's an imminent danger. Something to note as well on this is that if there's no actual threat, if it's all perceived and if it's all in your mind and this fear is being bred by you, then there's no actual fear there. So if there's no threat, there's no actual fear, and you can conquer what you can conquer by just changing your reality and changing your perspective and be like, oh, this isn't as bad as I think it is. Like, okay, moving on. Values. Let's talk about values for a second. When determining you're orienting yourself to the world, like what do you value? And I ask people this because this is solely based off of your experiences of what you choose to believe, but what you adopt. And so there's a bunch of values out there. It's just what values do you cash in on? What values do you invest in? What values do you hold and that you continue to use over and over again? And a lot of people are confused on the definition of a value, and that's okay, because typically, like, we don't know the definitions of these big words. Why do we not know the definitions of these big words? But sometimes it's used interchangeably with other words. So you want to make sure that when we talk about values, we're talking about specifically the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. So it's a useful piece of information, a useful tool that you use in your life that helps you determine your actions. So what do you value? Bring them in. Now, a lot of the times people will value other things or other people's values, like a family value that you've had, but not actually question why you continue these values. So make sure that the values that you have are effective for you. Next, you look at what you believe. A value is different from a belief, and which is why I'm going through definitions like a kindergartner here. Because a belief is acceptance that a statement is true or something exists. And remember, at the very beginning of this training, I said, like, you have to follow the truth. You have to follow the what you believe is good. That's going to cause good things to happen. This is good karma. This is light. This is positive. This is God. This is Holy Spirit. Like, this is the good things that motivate you to drive you to a net positive in the world. And whatever you believe is true, or whatever you believe, that is your reality. And you respond to what you believe is true. And what you believe is true may not be the actual truth, but what you believe is true, that's what you respond to. So that's why we always have to be aware of what we believe, what we are thinking, and what we are doing, and how we're reacting, and just being observant of ourselves. Because if we're observant of ourselves, then we can control more. And that is typically what we want. We want control. But instead of controlling other people or controlling factors that are beyond our control, we can control us in order to move through the environment to navigate through the life's challenge. I love the second definition too. It's a trust. It's a trust. It's a faith. It's a confidence in someone or something. Oh, can I just talk about this for a second? How much do you trust in your own decisions? How much do you trust yourself in order to get you through? Or do you put the trust in other people? And are these sources trustworthy? Or are they kind of leading you astray? And so always trust your decisions. Trust in yourself by getting to know yourself. And if you know yourself, you know what you decide, and you know what's good for you and what's not. And if you don't, if you get to the other side and it's not good, it's not effective, then you know how to pivot, because you are confident in your ability. You have the courage, you have the strength, you have the energy to put forward to it, because you're not reacting. You're taking your time to respond. And you're trusting, you're putting faith in yourself and trusting your own decisions to get you through. And I think this is where the higher power really comes into play. And we'll talk about this on the next slides. But there's also speaking of control, there's also a span of influence that you have. So we want to control what we have control over. We don't want to perceive that we can control anything outside of our span of control, because that's wasted energy. So the definition of control is it's the power or influence or direct people. It's the power to influence or direct people's behavior or the course of events. Now notice that it says the power to influence or direct. You cannot take over somebody's body and act for them. Their soul and their identity is the conduit to their body. You have a conduit, which is your body, and this is your span of control. Now you can influence things. Like, I can influence the air just by pushing on the air, because that sends out a wave, a vibration. It sends the air pushing through here. And so I affect everything in this room. I just now affected the frequencies in this room, and I'm vibrating at a certain frequency, and that affects things. And so you have an influence, but you cannot control other things. So if you know that you're in control of you, you don't feel out of control and then react out of trauma. So I mentioned this before, and we're going to dive into it a little bit further. So there's three different types of power in this world, and collectively everybody agrees. Okay. World thought leaders, quantum physics, neuroscience, Buddhism, Christianity, doesn't matter. Everybody believes in there's three types of power. There's human power. This is the choice that you have. As a human, as a conduit in your soul, as a conduit using your body. Like, this is your span of control within your life span, however long that is. And humans typically live anywhere from 0 to 120 years is the lifespan. So where you fall into that is based off of your life experience. But there's also a divine power, and the divine power, we're going to label it as truth. And then we also have a dark power, and we're going to label that as lies if we don't know what we believe in yet. Because if we understand that there's three powers at play, that we are not just responsible for every little thing that we do, which there is a level of accountability to the choices that we make, absolutely. But we don't have to take on all the heavy burden of, oh my gosh, I made a decision, and then 100% of this decision is based off of me, and the whole world is crumbling and weight on my shoulders because of the weight of this one decision. It's not that way. It's not that way. So you're not 100% responsible for every single little thing, but you are responsible for every choice that you make according to these powers. So human power, this is within the span of your control. This is your voice. This is your choice. This is your path based off of your beliefs, your values, of your level of understanding of how the world works, and which choice is going to be the most effective choice. Your soul is connected to your identity as a person. And your soul is the thing that drives this conduit of the body that you have. So the soul, who is who you are at your core. So you have basic fundamental traits as a human and behaviors as a human. And this collectively makes up you as a person. So who you are, what you believe, and the choices that you make equals the impact on your world and who you are as a person. It's almost like a pendulum. When you're going through your human power, you have a choice to make every single day on every single thing that you do. I had a choice to drink my coffee out of a white coffee cup. But instead, I love this cup. I love it because it's pink and it says pray, pray, pray. And the only thing I wish that it had on the other side was act, act, act. So pray, 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 act, act, act. Because we do have, we do definitely have to act in certain things. Otherwise, it never happens. It just stays in our brain, but it never actually comes to fruition. So the gap of how much you of influence that you have, how much success that you can achieve. Let's just say that. So how much success that you have versus how much destruction you can cause, that is vast. Because if you think of it like you are a human walking through your human power, and then a divine influence comes in or a dark influence comes in, it's almost like a pendulum swing where it's always going to be like this. There's always going to be friction, and you're always going to have to choose between good and evil, light and dark, sin and saint, positive, negative, whatever it is. Whatever you choose, this affects everything. It's a ripple effect on it. But it goes to show too that the amount of pain that you feel is directly proportionate to the amount of joy that you can feel. So if you can feel deep pain, you can experience great joy. And that gap widens with life experiences because we learn through pain and we rest through joy. So you have a ton of energy within you. Your goal here is to direct it with one choice. Like, where are you going to go? And you're not going to do it perfectly. Again, 80-20 rule. You have to understand this, is that you're not going to do it perfectly, even though I know that's hard to hear. But understanding your influence on the world and the impact that you can create can give you a huge sense of purpose, a new, even it can open so many doors for you. It can create a new experience and new goals and new motivation and new drive. And this is the fun part. This is where it gets super fun to watch, is okay, like, what do I want to experience? Who do I want to be? What do I want my life to look like? And how do I navigate through that? And who do I need to have in my life in order to achieve that? What kind of tools do I need? And you'll find that you're always equipped to deal with the things that you need to deal with, because nothing is new under the sun. We're dealing with the same problems that we've been dealing with since the dawn of time. If you look at it, if you actually take a look at what we deal with and the problems that, I mean, Aristotle was talking about children and how unruly they are to their parents. Sound familiar? You know, we go through life and have the same basic fundamental principles, but we experience it in varying ways based off of our individuality. And you are an individual person with an individual DNA code. And even if you are an identical twin, you're not going to be completely 100% them, because you're going to have different life experiences, different likes, different dislikes, and different personality traits. So that's what I mean by that. So you got to ask yourself, like, what power do I need to take back in my life? And what choices do I need to make in order to make it happen? And I know that these choices are going to be painful. And I know that some things are going to be cut off. And I'm going to deal with the grief through it, because you can't get over something. You go through something. And once you deal with the grief by moving through it and moving past it, then you learn something. And sometimes you don't learn. Sometimes you have to go through the same thing over and over and over and over and over again until you learn what is effective. So, and sometimes what was effective in the past is no longer effective now, because you're not the same person that you were 10 years ago that you are today. And you're not going to be the same person in 10 years from where you are today now. So if you understand that things are changing, things are moving, but you have the same basic principles to get through your life and to navigate through it, you're going to be just fine. Let's talk about divine power. We talked about human power. Now we're going to switch to divine power. These types of events transcend our level of understanding. We do not understand them because they're not flesh and blood principles. These are they're real experiences to us, because we observe them happening. We register, our body registers what's happening. So if there's a change, if there's a shift in the energy that is good, then we can consider that divine power. So if you're unsure what you believe, label this truth. So I'm only going to look for what is true versus a lie, because a lie is not going to help me move forward. A lie is going to keep me stuck. It's going to keep me depressed. It's going to create anxiety. It's going to affect everybody else around me. And if my system's depressed, then I'm going to depress other people's systems, even if I don't interact with them. Even if I walk into Walmart or Target or whatever, place that you shop at, you're going to affect people's systems just by your mere presence alone. You don't even have to say hi to them. Your system is going to speak to their system, because we have different types of languages that we use. So some people believe in light. Some people believe in love. Some people believe in God. Some people believe in positivity. So what do you believe in? And identify that and explore that. A lot of people don't explore that. A lot of people avoid that because of something called a moral injury or a religious injury. And there's a big, 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 big difference between religion and the relationship that you have with your higher power. So when I say divine power, I'm not talking about religion. Religion is an institution of man. Religion is a structure of things set forth by a culture of people. So a relation is how does the divine affect me? Or how do I interact with the divine? If I choose not to interact with the divine, fine. You don't have to. You don't have to interact with the dark either. You can become an atheist and just stay in your human power, but understand that that human power has limitations. You're still going to be affected by influences. You're still going to be affected by good and bad things. It's just, where do you fall into your span of control, and what do you choose to focus on? And what you choose to focus on, you're going to get more of. So also there's that as well. So look at the good in your life, or look at the truth in your life, look at the light in your life, like define that. What does that look like? Then you have dark power. And I say this, we have so many varying beliefs on this subject, but this is the bad, the negative, the Murphy's Law, the demonic energy. And there is a huge energy surrounding this, and you can feel it. Like, you walk into a room and there's a bunch of depressed people, you can feel that heaviness. That's what I'm talking about. That's the dark power that we deal with. And again, not in a religious sense, but a relational sense. What does the darkness do to you? How does it impact you? Depression and anxiety definitely impacts everybody, because that's hindering us feeling joy. And we were meant to feel joy. We were meant to move forward through the challenges of life. And we tend to overcomplicate things a lot. Life was supposed to be simple, but we tend to just make it even bigger than it normally is. And when talking about dark power, if you give in to the dark power, if you think, oh, this is just my life, I'm supposed to be depressed, I'm supposed to go through all this stuff, and this is just happening to me, it's not happening for me. And that's the language change there. It happens for you. It doesn't happen to you. But if you stay in that, then it's going to have a negative decline and a negative effect on the world. And if we're looking for a positive, a net positive for the world, we are looking for that positivity, that joy, that integration of both. And honestly, sometimes you need dark power to come in. Sometimes you need that negative lesson. Sometimes you need that gut check, and that humility check is what it is, really, because you start to understand that there's only so much that you can do, but there is a lot that you can do. And I say that with the emphasis to show you that, again, you're in human power. How does the darkness and how does the divine power affect your decision making? Because this is going to drive the foundation of your life. And it's really important that you know this, because otherwise you're just making decisions to make decisions, and you're going to find yourself in more ruts and stuck more often. So this brings it to the end of day 2. Now you have a homework assignment here, because this is really important to understand. And I'm telling you this because it's huge emphasis, because people don't do this. People don't take the time to learn why they do what they do. They would rather make excuses for other people of why other people have done this to them, or, I just can't because it's too hard and blah, blah, blah. It's not hard. The only thing that is hard is getting out of your own way, is letting your ego drop for a second, just so you can understand that this isn't about you 100%, but it is about your influence. It is about what you control. It is about you moving forward. So ask yourself, how much control do I really have in my life? How much control over this situation do I have? How much control do I have over my marriage? How much control do I have over my finances? How much control do I have over myself? And you'll find that there are varying levels and different degrees, and that's okay. But understand your level of control and how much energy and effort to put into it. Otherwise, you'll overspend your energy. And we want to look at our energy as an investment. We want to make sure that we keep as much energy as possible to work for us, so that way we can help other people and help them even more effectively than we did if we were in a different frame of mind. The second thing is, what is my belief system that will help me make a decision? You want to make sure that you want to look at your belief system. What do I believe in? And how is this going to define how I'm going to act? Using my OODA loop, what am I going to do? Using the if and then statements, what am I going to do? Or what am I really fearful about? What do I really believe about fear? And what do I know about fear? What do I feel about fear? What does my gut say about fear? What does my heart say about fear? What does my mind say about fear? Are they all on the same page when it comes to that? Do I know that I can control my fear response? And is this a real fear? And we talked about this on day one, is that a lot of fears aren't even really real. The only real fear that humans have is elevated CO2 levels in the blood. That's drowning. So as long as you're not near a body of water, you're good. Like, let's navigate through certain things. What do I choose to do? This is the third question that you're going to ask yourself. What do I choose to do based on the desired outcome? Now, this is where a lot of people get stuck because we're not confident in our decisions. So we have to learn how to trust ourselves, going back to values, going back to beliefs, going back to control. What do we trust in? And if we can't trust our own decisions because we've made wrong or bad or ineffective decisions, the correct term is ineffective. If we've made ineffective decisions in the past, it's going to, of course, create this nervousness in you of like, am I going to make the right decision moving forward? And that is when you bring in your community. You bring in your community of individuals, because it's not just your perspective alone. You can trust in your decisions, but you also want to orient yourself to your teammates, your wingmen. Just like if you were in a plane up in the air, you want to make sure that where you're going isn't going to lead you directly into a mountain that you don't see. So make sure that you know what choices you have to make in order to create the environment that you want to have. And if you're finding that you're going in a wrong or ineffective pattern, then you're going to reorient, you're going to pivot, you're going to change course, but you're also going to allow people around you to know that as well. That brings it to number 4. How will my decision affect others? And your decisions always affect everybody, like everybody that you come into contact with. Your decisions are going to affect something. And I want you to understand that, because a lot of people just say, well, the choices I make are my choices and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, yes, they are your choices, but you also have to understand that there's consequences, good, bad, indifferent, negative, positive, to your decisions. And so you want to make sure that you are also looking at the ripple effect of what you're going to cause before you cause it. Because if you get into that point where, and things are going to happen, again, 80-20, let's say that you find yourself, and you will, in a position where you caused a ripple effect, that is where the humility comes in. That's where the vulnerability comes in. And that's when the honesty kicks in, and you say, I understand that this choice was probably not the most effective choice, but let me look back and see where I went wrong, and let me make it right from there. And then just choose the next best thing. Don't stay in the guilt and the shame of, oh my gosh, like I did this. Why did I do this? And blah, blah, blah. Because rule number 1, be kind to yourself. That is the golden rule. So hopefully this training on day 2 was helpful for you. Again, if you like this training, I'm not charging for it, but definitely tell somebody about it. It's going to be up in the Facebook group, and I am so excited for day 3. Thank you so much.